My name is Kimberly, and I was born into a typical household. Although my parents were well off, they weren't exactly living the high life. Let me tell you, my elder brother was the golden child. He was 5 years my senior. My brother was sent to a posh private school with all the bells and whistles by our parents. I was trundled off to the neighborhood public school in the meanwhile. It was not horrible, don't get me wrong, but it was a whole different experience. This was once when I was around 8 years old. I was feeling quite motivated after viewing a music video of this incredible artist. Excitement rushed through me. I asked, "Mom, can I take singing lessons, please?" She simply gave me a look as though I had two heads. "Kimberly, singing lessons? Don't act absurd. It's just an absurd pastime. When you grow up, you should concentrate on obtaining a legitimate career." My father interjected, saying, "Your brother is the family's smartest member. My dear, you're going to have to use your hands. Spending money on singing lessons is pointless." I then started searching the internet for vocal training. In an attempt to appease my parents, I would practice in my room. In our home, saying "Kimberly, stop that racket" became a regular expression. If my Aunt Sarah hadn't been there, things could have continued in that manner. I mean, she was my mom's sister, a dentist, financially secure, and for some reason, she genuinely appeared to like spending time with me. She happened to catch me singing in my room one day. She just smiled and I felt very ashamed. "Kimberly, I thought that was really lovely. Why didn't you tell me you could sing?" I shrugged as my cheeks began to heat. Mom and Dad say it's silly. There was a strange expression on Aunt Sarah's face, as if she was trying not to frown. "Well, I find it to be really great. What if we gave you some appropriate instruction?" Everything was different after that day. Aunt Sarah ended up becoming my comfort tool. After she got me a synthesizer, we would jam out to tunes for hours on end. I felt as though a completely new universe had opened up for me. My folks weren't overjoyed to learn about the lessons. Mom even had the audacity to suggest to Aunt Sarah that our son ought to get that money instead. However, Aunt Sarah only grinned serenely and remarked, "I believe Kimberly has a genuine talent." I'm glad to tend to it. It was the first time I had ever had someone defend me in such a way. I felt understood, like if perhaps I wasn't the family let down after all. My brother was living the good life, while I was barely making ends meet with my singing lessons. He came home one day giddy with hockey excitement. He said, "Mom, Dad, I want to play hockey," during supper, almost suffocated on my peas. It was tennis last month, American football the month before, and let's not even talk about his short-lived rugby phase. Did our parents hesitate, though? Nope. Just nodding, Dad answered, "Sure, son, we'll get you signed up tomorrow." Not surprisingly, hockey didn't take off either. None of the other sports did either. My brother was never really good at anything. He was just like a pinball, bouncing from one hobby to another. Next was the sports era. Whoa. One day, "I need a gaming computer," he declared. "Top of the line, and I need my own room for training and competitions." I kept waiting for my parents to give in, but they never did. Like goofballs, they merely nodded in agreement. Mom answered, "Of course, honey. We'll set everything up for you." Indeed they did. They turned the guest room into a haven for his gaming. My cousins used synthesizer, and I shared a room, and the computer they got him was more expensive than my complete wardrobe. Our living room's wall of fame was the worst feature. It was this grand exhibition of all my brother's accomplishments, if I may use that phrase. There were scholastic trophies from his posh private school, participation certificates from every sport he'd given up on, and even a plaque for best grin from his third-grade yearbook. And me. Not a single place on that wall, not even a little corner for my perfect attendance records, or the school singing competition I'd won. When it came time for college, things really got out of hand. Naturally, my brother was accepted to an Ivy League university. Parents were ecstatic. They covered every expense, including tuition, a luxurious off-campus apartment, a new automobile, and everything else. The 4 years passed so quickly. To distract myself from the injustice of it all, I concentrated on my singing, my studies, and anything else. Throughout it all, Aunt Sarah was my pillar of support, always ready to provide advice or introduce me to a new music. Then my brother broke through the front door one lovely afternoon. This chick was with him, dangling off his arm and very giggly. He yelled, "Mom, Dad, I've got news." Naturally, they arrived at his beck and call without fail. He remarked, beaming like he had just won the lotto. "This is Melissa," he continued. "We recently tied the knot. She is going to live with us." I thought Mom was going to faint from happiness. Dad started talking about clearing out more space, maybe converting the attic. As everyone fussed over the happy couple, I slipped away to my room. I had a bad feeling about what was coming next, and boy, was I right. The next month was like living in a bizarre parallel universe. Mom and Dad were all over my brother and his new wife, Melissa. They were redecorating his room, buying new furniture, even talking about building an extension to the house. Meanwhile, I was invisible, more than usual. I tried to focus on my future. I'd graduated high school with honors, not that anyone noticed, and was eyeing this small college with a decent vocal program. It wasn't fancy, but it was something. I knew Mom and Dad had been saving for my college fund. It wasn't much, but it would cover the basics, or so I thought. One morning, about a month after the happy couple moved in, Mom and Dad called me into the living room. I should have known something was up when I saw their faces. "Kimberly," Dad started, his voice oddly formal. "We need to talk about your future. We've decided to use your college fund to cover your living expenses for the past 18 years. I blinked, sure I'd heard wrong. "What?" "You're an adult now," Dad continued, not meeting my eyes. "It's time you started paying your own way." The room started to spin. But what about college? I was counting on that money. Mom's face hardened. "Your brother is married now. He needs more space and money for his family. We're giving him your room." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So what? I'm just supposed to leave? Where am I supposed to go? "You'll need to find a job and your own place to live," Dad said, like he was discussing the weather. "You won't be able to afford college without money." Something inside me snapped. For the first time in my life, I felt real, burning anger towards my parents. "You can't do this. I'm your daughter. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home too." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom stormed out of the room. I thought that was it, that maybe they'd reconsider, but she came back with a suitcase. "Fine," she spat. "If you won't leave, I'll pack for you." She started grabbing my things, throwing them haphazardly into the suitcase. I stood there, frozen in shock. That's when I noticed my brother and Melissa standing in the doorway, watching the whole scene with smug smiles on their faces. Something in me broke. This wasn't my family. These weren't the people who were supposed to love and support me. I pushed past Mom and started packing my own things. I grabbed my clothes, my few pieces of jewelry, and most importantly, the music books and recordings Aunt Sarah had given me over the years. Nobody said a word as I packed. Nobody tried to stop me. And when I walked out the front door, dragging my suitcase behind me, nobody called me back. I found myself on Aunt Sarah's doorstep, my whole life packed into one measly suitcase. When she opened the door and saw my tear-stained face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug and said, "Oh, Kimberly, come in, sweetheart." That night, over a cup of hot cocoa, I spilled everything. Aunt Sarah listened, her face growing darker with each word. When I finished, she took my hand and squeezed it tight. "You're staying here," she said firmly, "and tomorrow we're going to figure out your future." I slept better that night than I had in years, knowing I was finally somewhere I was wanted. The next morning, Aunt Sarah dropped a bombshell on me. "I'm paying for your college," she announced over breakfast. "I've been saving for years, hoping to help you chase your dreams. This is what that money is for." We spent the next few weeks researching colleges. Aunt Sarah suggested we look into programs that combined acting and singing. "You've got a gift, Kimberly," she said. "Let's find somewhere that'll help you shine." We finally settled on a performing arts college in a city a few hours away. It had an amazing reputation and offered exactly the kind of training I'd always dreamed of. When it came time for the entrance exams, Aunt Sarah took time off work and drove me there herself. I sang my heart out, pouring every ounce of emotion into my performance piece. When I finished, the panel of judges was silent for a moment. Then they broke into applause. A week later, I got the acceptance letter. I was in. I threw myself into my studies. Every class, every rehearsal, every late-night practice session. I gave it my all. I signed up for every singing competition I could find and performed in every amateur theater production that would have me. If there was a part in a musical, no matter how small, I was there auditioning. Before I knew it, 4 years had flown by. I graduated with honors, my final showcase performance earning a standing ovation. That's when things really took off. A rep from a big musical theater studio was in the audience that night. He approached me after the show, talking fast about potential and opportunities. Next thing I knew, I was signing a contract with one of the biggest names in the business. Suddenly, I wasn't just performing in college productions or local theaters. I was on real stages in front of real audiences, playing lead roles in honest-to-God professional musicals. It was terrifying and exhilarating, everything I'd ever wanted. Through it all, Aunt Sarah was my rock. She came to every performance she could, always sitting in the front row, always the first one on her feet for a standing ovation. We'd go for late-night pancakes after each show, and she'd gush about every little detail of my performance. Looking at her beaming face across the table, I realized something. This woman, who had no obligation to me beyond being my mother's sister, had given me more love and support than my own parents ever had. She wasn't just my aunt anymore. She was the mom I'd always wished I had. Life was going great. I had just landed a lead role in a new musical that was generating serious buzz. One afternoon, I dropped by Aunt Sarah's place, bursting with excitement about my plans and prospects. "Aunt Sarah, you won't believe what's happening," I gushed, detailing my upcoming projects and dreams. She listened with that warm smile of hers, but as I was getting ready to leave, she dropped a bombshell. "Kimberly," she said gently, "you've grown into such a wonderful young woman. Don't you think it's time to reconcile with your parents? They're still your family, dear." I wanted to argue, but the hopeful look in her eyes stopped me. After everything she'd done for me, how could I refuse? "Okay," I said reluctantly, "I'll try." The next day, I found myself standing on my parents' doorstep, feeling like a stranger. Mom answered, her eyes widening in surprise. "Kimberly," she said, like she wasn't sure it was really me. "Hi, Mom," I replied, forcing a smile. "Can I come in?" They let me stay, but it was clear I wasn't welcome. The house felt different, colder somehow. And get this, my brother was still living there. Apparently, his wife had been kicked out. Mom grumbled something about her playing video games all day and refusing to help around the house or get a job. For days, I endured their frosty silence and disapproving looks. I was about ready to call it quits when my brother cornered me in the kitchen. "So," he sneered, still chasing that silly singing dream, "let me guess, you're a star in some dingy bar now." Something in me snapped. I stood up straight, looked him in the eye, and said, "Actually, I'm the lead singer in several successful musicals, and I'm doing quite well for myself." "Thank you." You should have seen their faces. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Suddenly, Mom and Dad couldn't stop asking questions. "Musicals? Really?" Dad pressed. "How much do you make?" I tried to leave, but Mom practically blocked the door. "You must be making good money," she insisted. "How much is your contract worth?" "That's confidential," I said, trying to edge past her. Dad's face hardened. "Now listen here, young lady. After everything we've done for you, you owe us. We're your parents. You're obligated to help us and your brother." And just like that, I was 18 again, standing in the same house, being told I wasn't worth investing in. But this time, I wasn't that scared, insecure girl anymore. "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice steady. "You kicked me out, remember? Told me I wasn't worth supporting. Well, guess what? I made it without you, and I don't need you now." I headed straight to Aunt Sarah's house. She took one look at my face and opened her arms. As I hugged her, I knew this was my real family. This was home. Life has a cruel way of pulling the rug out from under you just when things seem to be going well. I was riding high on my success, performing in sold-out shows night after night, when I got the call that changed everything. Aunt Sarah had cancer. The world seemed to stop spinning. I wanted to drop everything and rush to her side, but she insisted I keep performing. "Your dreams are my dreams too," she told me over the phone, her voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "Don't you dare give them up for me." So I kept touring, but every free moment I had, I spent with her. We'd sit in her garden, talking about everything and nothing. I tried to memorize every detail of her face, the sound of her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. But cancer is a merciless enemy. Despite the treatments, despite our hopes and prayers, Aunt Sarah's condition worsened rapidly. Then one day, while I was in the middle of a tour, I got the call I'd been dreading. Aunt Sarah was gone. I was lucky, if you can call anything about this situation lucky, that I had a few days break between shows. I caught the first flight home, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed in a vice. As soon as the funeral was over, I had to fly back. The show must go on, as they say. But every performance felt hollow now. I sang the notes, hit the marks, but my heart wasn't in it. How could it be when it was shattered into a million pieces? When the tour finally ended, I returned home, exhausted and grieving. That's when I got a call from a notary. Apparently, Aunt Sarah had left a will, and I needed to come in to discuss it. I went to the notary's office, not really caring about what Aunt Sarah might have left me. Nothing could replace her. But when the notary started reading the will, I couldn't believe my ears. Aunt Sarah had left me everything. Her house, her savings, all of it. I broke down crying right there in the notary's office. In the following days, I moved into Aunt Sarah's house. I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I could move forward when my past came knocking, literally. One afternoon, there was a pounding on the door. I opened it to find my brother standing there, looking disheveled and desperate. "I need money," he blurted out before I could even say hello. "My wife's pregnant, and I left Mom and Dad. They've been driving me crazy with their nagging and criticizing. You've got to help me, Kimmy." I stood there stunned. After everything that had happened, this was how he approached me. "Why don't you get a job?" I suggested, trying to keep my voice level. His face contorted in disgust. A job? I don't need a job. I need money. You've got plenty now, don't you? That old lady left you everything. That old lady's comment made my blood boil. That old lady was more family to me than you ever were, I spat. And no, I won't give you money. His eyes narrowed. You tricked her, didn't you? Manipulated that senile old woman into giving you everything. You're nothing but a thief. I'll take you to court, you'll see. Something in me snapped. All the grief, all the anger I'd been holding in came rushing out. Get out, I snarled. Get out of my house right now. You want to take me to court. Go ahead. Try explaining to a judge how the sister you abandoned deserves your handouts. Go on, get out. I slammed the door in his face, my whole body shaking as I leaned against the closed door. I realized something. This house, this inheritance, it wasn't just a gift. It was Aunt Sarah's final act of love, her way of protecting me even after she was gone. Just when I thought the drama with my brother was over, my phone rang. It was my parents. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Kimberly, my mother's voice came through, sickly sweet. We heard about the inheritance. Don't you think you should share some of that with your family? After all, Sarah was our relative too. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious right now? I asked, my voice ice cold. Now, Kimberly, my mother continued. We're just saying family should help family. You've got so much now, surely you can spare some for us. That was it, the last straw. Family. I spat. You want to talk about family? Where was your sense of family when you kicked me out? When you told me I wasn't worth investing in? When you chose my brother over me every single time? There was silence on the other end. Let me remind you of something, I continued, my voice shaking with anger. Aunt Sarah left me everything because she believed in me when you didn't. She supported me when you abandoned me. You don't get to be family now that it's convenient for you. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath, then my father's voice, cold and hard. You ungrateful little rubbish. After everything we've done for you. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter, like I'd finally said everything I'd been holding in for years. But it wasn't over, far from it. The next day, I started seeing posts on social media. My parents were on a warpath, posting long, teary-eyed statuses about how their daughter had stolen their sister's inheritance. How I was a manipulative thief who couldn't even be bothered to organize a proper funeral for my aunt. It was all lies, of course. The funeral had been beautiful, exactly as Aunt Sarah would have wanted, but the truth didn't matter to them. They were out for blood. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly in my inbox, calling me horrible names. Old acquaintances left nasty comments on my photos. It felt like the whole world was turning against me. Every day brought new threats, new insults. My parents created fake profiles to harass me. When I blocked their main accounts, my brother joined in, spinning wild tales about how I'd tricked a senile old woman out of her money. Then I heard through the grapevine that they were planning to sue me. My brother, my parents, they were all looking for lawyers to contest the will. For a moment, panic set in. What if they won? What if they took away this last gift from Aunt Sarah? I hired a lawyer of my own just in case, but it turned out I didn't need to worry. My lawyer smiled when I told him about the threats of a lawsuit. They don't have a leg to stand on, he assured me. The will is ironclad. Your aunt was of sound mind when she made it, and she was clear about her wishes. They can try to sue, but they'll lose. And they'll lose badly. Hearing that was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. The law was on my side. Aunt Sarah's wishes would be respected. The harassment didn't stop overnight. but knowing I was in the right gave me strength. I started blocking accounts, reporting the worst offenders for harassment. Slowly but surely, the tide of public opinion started to turn. 2 years flew by in a whirlwind of spotlights, standing ovations, and dreams come true. I had become the successful musical actress Aunt Sarah always knew I could be. My face graced billboards, my voice filled theaters, and I even found myself on TV, still pinching myself to make sure it wasn't all a dream. Life was good, really good. I was touring internationally, singing my heart out on stages I'd only ever imagined. Every performance felt like a tribute to Aunt Sarah, a way to honor her belief in me. Then came the night that changed everything. Again, I was back in my home state for a series of shows. It was a sold-out performance, the energy in the theater electric as I stood center stage, pouring my soul into a heart-wrenching ballad, the entire audience holding their breath. It happened. Two figures stood up abruptly, unfurling a large, hastily made poster. Even from the stage, I could make out the words, "Kimberly stole our money." My heart stopped. I'd recognize those voices anywhere, my parents. "She's a thief," my father bellowed. "She manipulated her aunt and stole our inheritance." The performance's enchantment broke. The crowd heard whispers that grew into a perplexed murmur. My co-stars became stuck, not knowing what to do. I felt like the terrified 18-year-old girl all over again as I stood there with the spotlight shining directly on me. But that was just briefly. Something inside me clicked as security scrambled to get my parents out, and the stage manager desperately sought to retake control. This was my time, my life. This was my stage. I moved forward, and my voice broke through the commotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to have interrupted you. Regretfully, those individuals are my divorced parents who have been persistently bothering me throughout the years. However, what's the deal? I'm living my dream every time I go onto this stage, and no one can take it away from me. Therefore, I can't be affected by their acts anymore." The auditorium grew quiet, and then a slow round of applause started. It kept growing until it reached a roar that muffled the cries my parents kept making as they were led away. After the show was over, I thought it was one of my greatest ever. Every sound I heard, every stride I took, seemed like a rebellion, a statement of my right to be there. I gave my lawyer a call early the next day. It had to end. It was time to put an end to this permanently. Armed with years' worth of evidence, including witness testimonies of their disturbance, threatening texts, and social media posts, we appeared in court. The case was unambiguous. My parents are legally prohibited from contacting me or being near my performances due of the restraining order that the judge ordered against them. My career took off in the next years and reached unprecedented heights. I performed all over the world in places I had only ever dreamed of going. It was exciting to meet new audiences and stages every time. My brother and parents were just names in the distance, people I could walk by without a second thought. They had vanished from my tale. Rather, I created a new family consisting of fans whose lives I impacted via my music, friends who supported me no matter what, and fellow artists. The memory of a lady who spotted a spark in a little girl and did all in her power to help it flare into a fire is at the heart of it all.